1886, Ambrose Bierce's An Inhabitant of Carcosa is published. 1891, Hastur first appeared in Ambrose Bierce's short story Hyades the Shepherd as a benign god of shepherds. 1895, Robert W. Chambers publishes The King in Yellow, a book of short stories. 1913, Bierce is known to have accompanied the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa's army. His last known communication with the world was a letter which he wrote to a close friend, dated December 26th, 1913, after closing this letter by saying, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination." He vanished without a trace, his disappearance becoming one of the most famous in American literary history. All that was found was a notebook belonging to his secretary and companion, Carrie Christensen, containing a rough summary of a purported letter and her statement that the originals had been destroyed. The King in Yellow is an ancient god whose scalloped tatters must hide Ytil forever. He is linked in some way with Carcosa, whose black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon when the twin suns sink into the lake of Hali. He occasionally appears on Earth, animating dead bodies or possessing those strange humans already in thrall to him, and those who fall under his influence fall into madness. Hello everyone, it's your bud. In today's video we will be talking about Hastur, the King in Yellow, one of my favorite creations related to the Cthulhu mythos created by H.P. Lovecraft. Known as the Cthulhu mythos for his most famous of creations, or at least that's what you might think. Actually, H.P. Lovecraft called it the Yog-Suthothery, after one of the most powerful old ones that haunted his horrifying nightmare realm. And I'm just going to make a quick note here, this isn't in the script, but many of the old ones have some really, let's just say, horribly racist names. So tons of Lovecraft stuff is like based in these horrible racist views and all of this, so I just wanted to mention that now. Yeah, I'm just gonna mention that I don't like the guy, but I do like the monsters and things he created. Not the inspiration he had for it, but just the horrors he created. So let's continue. After the death of Lovecraft, August Derleth, a publisher, bought the rights to his stories and began publishing them in his magazine Weird Tales with the byline H.P. Lovecraft and August Derleth. He would write that in his own short stories that he would publish, with Derleth calling himself a posthumous collaborator and changing the title of the mythos to the Cthulhu mythos to capitalize on the more famous of Lovecraft's creations, something that probably really pissed off the Lovecraft purists. If you can call them purists. I mean, I guess they literally were purists. Like Disney and Star Wars fans right now, like sort of like that. So someone bought the rights to something and then they began changing it. So yeah, Derleth was a Christian and began interjecting his faith into these short stories as well. He began relating certain old ones to certain elements where they were just amoral darkness before, not like linked to any specific element. But now he was like, Derleth was like saying, oh, this is the fire old one, this is the ice old one, or this or that. I can imagine it like comparing it to D&D, to the world wheel, to the world tree, and the other arrangements for the planes of D&D. The difference from 1st to 5th edition are immense in D&D. However, I truly believe that some room must be made for new growth, although that doesn't mean I agree with everything that Derleth was doing to Lovecraft's stories. I just think that if you don't change a story and you keep it the same forever, that, I don't know, it really keeps it stagnant sometimes. So I do believe that having the ability for new growth was a good thing, but having it be changed completely would really piss off the fans. But that was like 100 years ago, so we've moved on from that since then. That was like in the 1930s, so we've had plenty of time to move on from things. But since Derleth was the owner and publisher profiting, I think it was as such that it would like really sour the fans of Lovecraft to anything that could have been created in this new era of the Lovecraft mythos, even if it wasn't called that anymore. But the mythos has always been like that. The chaotic nature of the mythos is paralleled by its creation. Countless renditions of ideas changed and updated continuously in a maddeningly endless cycle. Anyways, this whole intro here at the beginning was just to explain that technically the Cthulhu mythos is known as the Yog-Suthothery by the author Lovecraft, and then Cthulhu mythos was basically like the, I don't know, like the Disneyized version. You know, like if Disney was buying Lovecraft today, they'd be like, oh, we're gonna call it the Cthulhu mythos, not the Yog-Suthothery, probably because Yog-Suthothery isn't relatable to the public, which is really stupid because that's like one of the most recognizable old ones, but still people don't know it. So they went with Cthulhu because it's the most recognizable. So now let's start moving away from the whole like debacle of what it's called. Is it the Cthulhu, the Yog-Suthothery? What's the mythos called? Is it the Lovecraft Mythos? All of that. So now that we've discussed that, we can move on and start understanding who Hastur is by starting at the very beginning, all the way back in 1886. We're going to be talking about the inspiration for the inspiration. In a nightmare that Ambrose Bierce had, he dreamed such a dream that later in life he would write it down in one of his short stories. And here follows the short story, An Inhabitant of Carcosa. For there be divers sorts of death, some wherein the body remaineth, and in some it vanisheth quite away with the spirit. This commonly occurreth only in solitude, such is God's will, and none seeing the end, we say the man is lost, or gone on a long journey, which indeed he hath. But sometimes it hath happened in sight of many, as abundant testimony showeth. In one kind of death the spirit also dieth, and this hath been known to do while yet the body was in vigor for many years. Sometimes, as is veritably attested, it dieth with the body, but after a season is raised up again in that place where the body did decay. Pondering these words of Hali, who God rest, and questioning their full meaning, as one who, having an intimation, yet doubts if there be not something behind other than which he had discerned, I noted not whether I had strayed until a sudden chill wind striking my face revived me in a sense of my surroundings. I observed with astonishment that everything seemed unfamiliar. On every side of me stretched a bleak and desolate expanse of plain, covered with tall overgrowth of sere grass, which rustled and whistled in the autumn wind with heaven knows what mysterious and disquieting suggestion. Protruded at long intervals above it stood strangely shaped and somber-colored rocks which seemed to have an understanding with one another as to exchange looks of uncomfortable silence, as if they had reared their heads to watch the issue of some foreseen event. A few blasted trees here and there appeared as leaders in this malevolent conspiracy of silent expectation. The day, I thought, must be far advanced, though the sun was invisible, and although sensible that the air was raw and chill, my consciousness of the fact was rather mental than physical. I had no feeling of this discomfort. Over all the dismal landscape, a canopy of low, lead-colored clouds hung like a visible curse. In all this there were a menace and a portent, a hint of evil, an intimation of doom. Bird, beast, or insect there was none. The wind sighed in the bare branches of the dead trees, and the gray grass bent to whisper its dread secret to the earth. But no other sound nor motion broke the awful repose of that dismal place. I observed in the herbage a number of weather-worn stones, evidently shaped with tools. They were broken, covered with moss, and half sunken to the earth. Some lay prostrate, some leaned at various angles, none was vertical. They were obviously headstones of graves, though the graves themselves no longer existed as either mounds or depressions. The years had leveled all. Scattered here and there where massive blocks showed once where pompous tomb or ambitious monument had flung its feeble defiance at oblivion. So old seem these relics, these vestiges of vanity and memorials of affection and piety, so battered and worn and stained, so neglected, deserted, forgotten the place, that I could not help thinking myself the discoverer of the burial ground of a prehistoric race of men whose very name was long extinct. Filled with these reflections, I was for some time heedless of the sequence of my own experience, but soon I thought, how came I hither? A moment's reflection seemed to make all clear, to explain at the same time, though in a disquieting way, the singular character with which my fancy had invested all that I saw or overheard. I was ill. I remember now that I had been prostrated by a sudden fever, and that my family had told me that in my periods of delirium I had constantly cried out for liberty and air, and had been held in bed to prevent my escape out of doors. Now I had eluded the vigilance of my attendants, and had wandered hither to where? I could not conjecture. Clearly I was at a considerable distance from the city where I dwelt, the ancient and famous city of Carcosa. No signs of human life were anywhere visible nor audible. No rising smoke, no watchdogs bark, no lowing of cattle, no shouts of children at play, nothing but their dismal burial place, with its air a mystery of dread due to my own disordered brain. Was I not becoming again delirious, there beyond human aid? Was it not indeed all an illusion of my madness? I called aloud the names of my wives and sons, reached out my hands in search of theirs, even as I walked among the crumbling stones in the withered grass. A noise behind me caused me to turn about. A wild animal, a lynx, was approaching. The thought came to me, if I break down here in the desert, if the fever returns and I fail, this beast will be at my throat. I sprang towards it, shouting. It trotted tranquilly by within a hand's breadth of me and disappeared behind a rock. A moment later, a man's head appeared to rise out of the ground a short distance away. He was ascending to the farther slope of a low hill whose crest was hardly to be distinguished from the general level. His whole figure came into view against the background of the gray cloud. He was half naked, half clad in skins. His hair was unkempt, his beard long and ragged. In one hand he carried a bow and arrow, the other held a blazing torch with a long trail of black smoke. He walked slowly and with caution, as if he feared falling into some open grave concealed by the tall grass. This strange apparition surprised but did not alarm, and taking such a course as to intercept him, I met him almost face to face. Accosting him with the familiar salutation, "God keep you," he gave no heed, nor did he arrest his pace. "Good stranger," I continued, "I'm ill and lost. Direct me, I beseech you, to Carcosa." The man broke into barbarous chant in an unknown tongue, passing on and away. The owl on the branch of a decayed tree hooted dismally and was answered by another in the distance. Looking upward, I saw through the sudden rift in the clouds Aldebaran and the Hyades. In all this there was a hint of the night, the lynx, the man with the torch, the owl. Yet I saw even the stars in absence of the darkness. I saw, but was apparently not seen nor heard. Under what awful spell did I exist? I seated myself at the root of a great tree, seriously to consider what it were best to do. That I was mad I could no longer doubt, yet recognized a ground of doubt in the conviction. Of fever I had no trace. I had withal a sense of exhilaration and vigor altogether unknown to me, a feeling of mental and physical exaltation. My senses seemed all alert. I could feel the air as a ponderous substance. I could hear the silence. A great root of the giant tree against whose trunk I leaned as I sat held enclosed in its grasp a slab of stone, a part of which protruded into a recess formed by another root. The stone was thus partly protected from the weather, though greatly decomposed. Its edges were worn round, its corners eaten away, its surface deeply furrowed and scaled. Glistening particles of mica were visible in the earth about its vestiges of its decomposition. The stone had apparently marked the grave of which the tree had sprung ages ago. The tree's exacting roots had robbed the grave and made the stone a prisoner. A sudden wind pushed some dry leaves and twigs from the uppermost face of the stone. I saw the low-relief letters of the inscription and bent to read it. God in heaven, my name in full, the date of my birth, the date of my death. A level shaft of light illuminated the low side of the trees as I sprang to my feet in terror. The sun was rising to the rosy east. I stood between the tree and the broad red disk. No shadow darkened the trunk. A chorus of howling wolves saluted the dawn. I saw them sitting on their haunches, singing, and in groups on the summits of irregular mounds and tumuli, fitting a half of my desert prospect and extending to the horizon, and then I knew that these were the ruins of the ancient and famous city of Carcosa. Such are the facts imparted to the medium bay rolls by the spirit Haseb Alar Rabarden. So that was a story based on a nightmare by Ambrose Bierce that then inspired Robert W. Chambers to write The King in Yellow. And then The King in Yellow eventually went on to inspire Lovecraft to add Hastur's name into the mythos, though it is undetermined if he was describing a place or person when he added it to his Yog-Suthothery, as he called it. Although I found a really good quote from Lovecraft talking about Chambers. So that short story before was from Ambrose Bierce, but now we're going to be moving on to Robert W. Chambers, who took the idea of Carcosa and this city and the stars Aldebaran. I think he took Aldebaran and the stars and used that as well, and then he put that into a series of short stories in a book titled The King in Yellow. So let's hear the quote from H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft said of Robert W. Chambers in a letter to Clark Ashton Smith, "Chambers is like Rupert Hughes and a few other fallen titans, equipped with the right brains and education, but wholly out of the habit of using them." which is just so good. Like, that's just such a good burn, right? Like, oh yeah, he's equipped with all the right knowledge, but he's just not used to using it. I like that. That's just such a good quote. A hilarious quote from a terrible person, but still, let's now dive into The King in Yellow and learn what it's about. I'm not going to be reading through the whole thing because it's an actual, like, book of short stories. So if you want to read it, it's free online because it was published in 1895. So all of this stuff is stuff that you can find online. The King in Yellow starts with a song. I'll just do it as a poem. Along the shore, the cloud waves break, the twin suns sink behind the lake, the shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies, but stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades shall sing, where flap the terrors of the king must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou unsung as tears unshed shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. The rest of The King in Yellow is split into a few short stories. I won't describe all of them, as the last three aren't really involving the King in Yellow. It seemed like the King in Yellow was mainly in the first of these stories, the first four, and then the last three don't mainly hold to it. So I'll describe some of it, but I won't describe all of it. So the rest of The King in Yellow is split into a bunch of short stories in which those who read the book form of a play known as The King in Yellow go mad after having read it or meet horrible dooms. So The King in Yellow is a book version of a play within the story, which is in all of these 7 short stories, that is then titled The King in Yellow, that was published in 1885. So The King in Yellow is both the fictional play in the book and the title of the book from 1895. The first short story is about a future version of America in the far, far future of the 1920s. Remember, this book was written in the 1890s. The first one is about a man who wishes to become the last king of the imperial dynasty of America, though it is later revealed that he has suffered a terrible fall and has read the play of The King in Yellow, suggesting that the narration of the story that the reader gets, which has all been from his point of view, may be quite unreliable, and it makes it difficult to ponder what was reality and what was his fantasy when it was narrated from the point of view of one who has read the play of The King in Yellow. The next is of a man who became paranoid about a musician playing the organ at his church, who he believes is following him. And I will read a bit of Robert W. Chambers' work here, so you will get a taste of what it's like, so you can understand what it's like having Ambrose Bierce, Robert W. Chambers, and then eventually having it go over to the Lovecraft Mythos. So let's hear a bit from him. All the inhabitants of the court had trooped out into the street. The place was quite deserted, lighted by a few lanterns hung high up, in which the gas burned dimly. My apartment was at the top of a house, halfway down the court, reached by a staircase that descended almost into the street, with only a bit of passageway intervening. I set my foot on the threshold of the open door. The friendly old ruinous stairs rose before me, leading up to the rest and shelter. Looking back over my right shoulder, I saw him. 10 paces off, he must have entered the court with me. He was coming straight on, neither slowly nor swiftly, but straight on to me. And now he was looking at me. For the first time since our eyes encountered across the church, they met now again, and I knew the time had come. Retreating backwards down the court, I faced him. I meant to escape by the entrance on Rue de Dragon. It seemed ages while we were going, I retreating and he advancing down the court in perfect silence. But at last I felt the shadow of the archway, and the next step brought me within it. I had meant to turn here and spring through into the street, but the shadow was not that of an archway, it was that of a vault. The great doors on Rue de Dragon were closed. I felt this by the blackness which surrounded me, and at the same instant I read it in his face. How his face gleamed in the darkness, drawing swiftly nearer. The deep vaults, the huge closed doors, their cold iron clamps were all on his side. The thing which he had threatened had arrived. It gathered and bore down on me from fathomless shadows. The point from which it would strike was his infernal eyes. Hopeless, I set my back against the barred doors and defied him. There was a scraping of chairs on the stone floor, and a rustling as the congregation rose. I could hear the Suisse's staff in the south aisle, preceding Monseigneur to the sacristy. The kneeling nuns, roused from their devout abstraction, made their reverence and went away. The fashionable lady, my neighbor, rose also with graceful reserve. As she departed, her glance just flitted over my face in disapproval. Half dead, or so it seemed to me, yet intensely alive to every trifle, I sat amongst the leisurely moving crowd, then rose too and went towards the door. I had slept through the sermon. Had I slept through the sermon? I looked up and saw him passing amongst the gallery to his place. Only his side I saw. The thin bent arm and his black covering looked like one of those devilish, nameless instruments which lie in the disused torture chambers of medieval castles. But I had escaped him, though his eyes had said I should not. Had I escaped him? That which gave him power over me came back out of oblivion, where I had hoped to keep it, for I knew him now, death and the awful abode of lost souls. Whether my weakness long ago had sent him, they had changed him for every other eye, but not for mine. I had recognized him from the first. I had never doubted what he came to do, and now I knew while my body sat safe in the cheerful little church, he had been hunting my soul in the court of the dragon. I crept to the door. The organ broke out overhead with a blare. A dazzling light flared the church, blotting the altar from my eyes. The people faded away. The arches, the vaulted roof vanished. I raised my seared eyes to the fathomless glare, and I saw the black stars hang in the heavens, and the wet winds from the lake of Hali chilled my face. And now, far away over leagues of tossing cloud waves, I saw the moon dripping with spray, and beyond the towers of Carcosa rose behind the moon, death and the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent him, had changed him for every other eye but mine, and now I heard his voice, rising, swelling, thundering through the flaring light as I fell, the radiance increasing, poured over me in waves of flame. Then I sank into the depths, and I heard the king in yellow whispering to my soul, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." So that was the opening short story in The King of Yellow. The other most important short story from The King in Yellow is the one titled The Yellow Sign, which is very important as we learn that the King in Yellow has a symbol, of which I'm sure has been in the background behind this very narration. The King in Yellow is an alien god whose scalloped tatters must hide you till forever. He's linked in some way with Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon when the twin suns sink into the lake of Hali. The king's nature, motives, and modus operandi are unclear, but he occasionally appears on Earth, animating dead bodies or possessing those strange humans already enthralled to him, and claiming or reclaiming those who have eluded him. To read the play is to be exposed to the king and to fall under his influence, going mad in the meantime. So between the multiple writers, the fact that a nightmare was then put into a story that then inspired a series of short stories by a man who disappeared while joining the Mexican Revolution after again inspiring another, this being Lovecraft, to include the name of Hastur into his own mythos. Wow, that was a long sentence. Between all of that, Hastur is an immensely unique character with a very, very storied background that has very, very little actually written about him. The yellow sign, Carcosa, his name, Hastur, he used to be the shepherd in the original books by Ambrose. Very, very little is known about him, but the story of Hastur is a large story when you look at the real-life history of him. I personally love the look of Hastur, and I actually bought a Hastur sticker for my PlayStation 4 controller. That's honestly how I learned who he was. He was the coolest looking controller overlay sticker. You know, like you buy it to make your controller look a little different so it's not just the exact same as everyone else's. Well, I saw a cool Hastur one and I was like, oh, well, that's neat. And then I was like, who's this character? Hastur, that's a cool one. What's that? And I learned all about that. And from then on, Hastur has been something that I absolutely loved. And now that SCP is getting so popular, I really wanted to talk about Hastur more. And then just yesterday, one of you commented about Weird Tales in my Conan the Barbarian video. Conan was also published in Weird Tales, and the comment yesterday reminded me of Lovecraft, Cthulhu, and my personal favorite, Hastur. Now I've told you his tale, and you too will think of him in days to come, more and more, until you are driven as mad as me. Wahahahaha. Seriously though, Hastur is just so awesome, isn't he? Like, we literally know nothing. When you look on I have so many different tabs open, I had to go through all the stories today. Let's see. Hastur he's known as the Unspeakable One, who's not to be named. There's a few different names, and then there's like one paragraph, and most of the paragraph is the original stories he was written in. The thing about Hastur that makes him so cool is how little there is written about him. All there is what you can think of, and the actual history of the character, which is passed on from nightmare city of Carcosa to actual like nightmare monster, it being included in the in Lovecraft. And when I say nightmare monster, I kind of mean Lovecraft himself. He was a horrible person. But to have Hastur make its way into the mythos before Lovecraft died, I think was something very important. And I think it shows just how spot on the writers were in creating the idea of Hastur, the King in Yellow. And when I say the writers, I mean multiple different people working over multiple different stories. And it only sort of pieces it together, sort of like this mythology thing where you have to be looking through and you have to interpret. Everything is interpreted with this, which is what I like so much about it, which is what makes the madness so potent, is because the madness is something that can only be interpreted by you and what you think the madness means. So there's one other thing that I have to mention here. The man who bought Lovecraft stuff and put it in the Weird Tales magazine, August Derleth, decided that he wanted to make Hastur the half-brother. I'm pretty sure it was August Derleth. So it goes like this. Ambrose Bierce had a nightmare, and then he wrote about it and published it in 1886 in An Inhabitant of Carcosa, where he made the city up. And then in 1895, Robert W. Chambers published The King in Yellow, which described the King in Yellow and Carcosa. And then later, Lovecraft included the name Hastur within his own mythos, the Yog-Suthothery. Hastur, the benign god of shepherds, or the King in Yellow, vile king of his city Carcosa, represented by the yellow sign and the madness wrought upon those who learn of his truth, in battle with his half-brother Cthulhu for unknown purpose, and whose power has yet to be revealed, and who, by Lovecraft's own words, held, and I quote here, the most hideous of connections. Hastur, the yellow sign, was drawn through many nameless eons and inconceivable dimensions to the worlds of Eldar, outer entity at which the crazed author of the Necronomicon had only guessed in the vaguest way. There is a whole secret cult of evil men. A man of your mystical intuition will understand me when I link them with Hastur and the yellow sign, devoted to the purpose of tracking them down and injuring them on behalf of the monstrous powers from the other dimensions. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. I don't know about you, but I think Hastur is awesome, and I think he has so much potential for future stories. I wish I could say more about him, but the more I say about him, the less cool he gets, because as I said, the madness is supposed to be personal to you, so I can't say anything that would speak upon the madness he would influence upon you. So anything that is unique to the individual that sees Hastur. Whoever, Carcosa, the stars, everything. Hastur is just so cool. The fact that he started out as like a benign god of shepherds and has mutated into this King of Yellow and had all these short stories about corruption and madness and gone this and that, and eventually inspired Lovecraft to say, well, that's really cool, I'll add it into my own mythos. So hey, it was a crossover. Could you imagine doing that nowadays if like some writer was like, hey, I really like the idea of your character, I'm going to put him in my story. That doesn't really happen too much. So the nightmare that Ambrose Bierce had when he had a fever as a child that inspired him to create his published story in 1886 has gone all the way up till now, with the SCP having even more views than I think now than ever before. SCP Foundation, for those who don't know, is sort of like the extra paranormal or outer or eldritch horrors. All of those are SCP's bread and butter, so if you want to know more about any of that, just let me know. Leave this video a like for more Lovecraft, Cthulhu, Weird Tales, or the modern day version SCP. A like shows me that you're interested in this topic and want more. Subscribe for daily videos. I make a new video every single day on this channel, and leave any questions or suggestions in the comments below, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Thanks for watching.